Welcome to Integrative Lawyers of the World, where we believe that lawyers contribute to the healing of the world at the individual level, the community level, the societal level, worldwide healing, by practicing law in a way that honors our interconnectedness, that values authenticity, and that is in integrity with our own values and purpose. And not only do we believe this, we know this, and that is why we showcase lawyers from all over the world who are doing just this. Hi, I'm your host, Carrie Raleigh, and our guest this episode is Geraldine Johns-Putra. Geraldine is an experienced corporate lawyer. She has her own law firm, Geraldine Grace, and she hosts her own podcast, New Earth Lawyer. I am so excited that you are joining into this episode. When I had my conversation with Geraldine, we discussed how she lives out her purpose to use the law to build purposeful, human-centered, earth-friendly legal enterprises and ecosystems for happier humans and a healthier planet. Enjoy our show, and thank you for joining in. Hi, Geraldine. Welcome to our show. And like I said in my introduction, I am super excited to interview you today. How are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you, Carrie. I'm excited to be on. I'm excited to be talking to you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. And you are joining us from Melbourne, Australia?
That's correct.
And just as a starting point, I noticed on your website and on your podcast, you have a statement on honoring the traditional owners of the land where you live. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's something that commonly happens in Australian settings, whether it's a face-to-face meeting or these days more often it's a Zoom meeting. We acknowledge the land, the traditional owners of the land, the indigenous owners of the land on which we meet or from where we're coming. And that is really a recognition. It probably goes back to an important High Court decision that was 1992, Mabo versus Queensland, the state of Queensland, where the High Court of Australia finally recognised that there was an unbroken connection to the land that Indigenous people have had to Australia, notwithstanding the colonialisation of Australia, notwithstanding that the Crown ultimately owns what we call radical sovereignty over the land. There's an unbroken connection that sort of supersedes that, although legally speaking it doesn't supersede, but in a moral sense it does. That gave birth to a whole new area of law that we call native title. And along with that recognition and that growing understanding that this land really belongs to the Indigenous people, and when it was colonized, it wasn't done so in a respectful way. So with that recognition, we began to acknowledge the ownership, and we do so now conventionally through these means. Either on my website, we will acknowledge in meetings, face-to-face meetings. Often we start off by acknowledging. So I could now say to you that I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I'm on, Bunurong country. And then we want to pay our respects to their elders, because their elders really are the spiritual representatives of the particular people. Yeah. And so we make an effort to find out who the traditional owners are of the land that we're on. And it differs obviously from site to site, depending on who the tribes were that were on it.
I see it when I read it on your website. It caught my interest. And then when I heard you start one of your podcasts saying it, I'm like, there's something really beautiful in this. And it's like the respect of where we came from, people before us came from, and the continuity and the connection between all of us. And how you're saying the land wasn't necessarily taken by respectful means, the same as with us in the United States, with Native Americans. But it's like we can't go back and undo history, but maybe in this effort we can at least acknowledge and pay respects to it.
Yeah, sure, that's a
Yeah.
big part of it. It's also part of the genuine attempts that people are making, not necessarily governments are making, but people are making to redress what happened. So it's a long journey. It's by no means, even halfway done. The Mabo judgment that I'm talking about, the decision that I'm talking about, was a landmark decision. But even what came out of it in terms of the legislation that was introduced has many shortcomings. So we recognize native title of Indigenous traditional owners, but that title brings with it not the rights you might expect, because there's all of this balancing between the rights of traditional owners to be connected to their land, to perform ceremony on their land, and the rights of for example, mining companies or agricultural companies, and their rights to exploit the land. So native title is although it was the outcome of that decision, native title as part of the law of this land has many, like I said, deficiencies, and people, as in so many of these cases, people have decided that they're going to try and make some amends. There's so much hurt that has occurred in the last 200 something years, that it's actually such a tiny way to even start to try and make amends. So we do it, but there's those of us who are committed to doing it, and there are many also recognize that we've got such a long way to go, such a long way.
Several things that caught my interest, but I'm going to ask questions about two. One is, you mentioned how it's a lot of it was driven by the people, and there are so many things, and sometimes we expect and we need our governments to act and do things, and the government leaders to do things. As we're speaking right now is when COP26 is going on in Glasgow. So we want leaders and governments to act, right, in ways that further humanity. But just like this, is people can also, we don't have to sit back and do nothing while we don't have to do anything. Our government and our leaders are going to do things for us. There's that people-driven aspect of it. And a couple of your podcasts kind of address this too, when you were talking about democracy and cherish our rights and people standing up and asserting our rights. And do you see more of that now, and balancing that with people driving change, but also holding our governments and our leaders and corporate world to accountability and to do change at the same time?
Yeah, completely. It's happening in so many spheres. That feeling of self-agency that I have the right to make my own decisions. I have the right to live as I see fit, balancing that out with a growing awareness of how we've got to take care of our planet, how we've got to take care of each other, how, as you said, you can't always rely on the government to do it. There's so much growing awareness of how important the individual is. And yet it's not just the individual, it's the interconnectedness of individuals, right? So it's happening. It is like a a mass awareness that's growing, but it's extremely messy because there are so many competing interests and so many competing viewpoints. There's different levels of trust of government. There are different agendas. Some groups will want to push one agenda ahead of another. One group might be more environmentally minded, another group might be more individual rights minded. So it's incredibly messy. But what it has in common is this recognition of autonomy and self-governance being crucial. I call it the growing up. Like, we are growing up. We are no longer content to be told, this is how you do it. This is, you follow the rules, be a good boy or good girl, or a good person, and you'll be fine. The government will look after you. Well, we've more or less lost trust that the government will do that, and we are learning that we've got to take it upon ourselves. So that's what I'm seeing is the underlying impetus to what's going on as a shift in humanity.
Hearing how you're describing it and reading and listening to one of your podcasts describing it, it's a very hopeful image of it. And I see I like how you said, like, growing up. And when you look through other times in history when people distrusted their government and there was chaos with it, it seemed like there were times where that distrust and the division between people led to autocrats coming into play and things like that. Where what you said was hopeful to me is maybe this growing up means that we're going to do this differently. Yes, we see signs of division like there was in the past, but maybe this growing up and this consciousness will help us go through this phase with a different result and a different outcome than was maybe in the past.
Obviously, you'd want to. That's the hopeful outcome, right?
Yeah.
Because if you thought, we were just going to have another series of revolutions that led to another split, for example, back in the last century when we had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, then it led to the Soviet Union being created. It was in its own sense hopeful, in its own sense, although very quickly the shortcomings of that revolution arose. But then we had the division that went on and on until the Berlin Wall fell. So why would a revolution now be any different? Well, I actually think it's part of that growing up. That's the first thing. The other is, if it's driven by a sense of serving others, then that's the antidote. Okay, because past revolutions have ended up being about self-interest of those who took power. And this is the important thing about the whole, when I talk about individual rights. Sometimes when I speak about individual rights, people think that I'm talking about selfishness. I'm not saying that if we're going to stand up for ourselves, then we stand up for ourselves at the expense of others. I'm talking about an elevation of the human being, right? An elevation of the rights of the human being, that you have to, you have to give that human being and all other human beings the same priority, plus obviously the interconnectedness with the planet. And that's what would set it apart. So you're serving, if you're standing up for yourself, what you're doing is you're loving yourself, as well as loving all other human beings, as well as loving the planet. And you want a government that is going to reflect that. So we put up with leaders. We put up with leaders whom we just accept are going to be self-interested. We vote them in, and then politics takes goes the way that politics always does. There's pork barreling or there's corruption, and then we just throw up our hands and we go, well, of course they're politicians. What do you expect? Why do we accept that?
Yeah.
Why do we accept that we're going to elect people who don't have our interests at heart? Why do we accept that behavior? Like we should all be expecting of ourselves and everybody else that kind of element of, if you're going to be in a position of trust or you're going to be in a position of service, then that's how you're going to behave, and we won't accept anything else.
We shouldn't accept anything else. And I think it's also, there's a low expectation that someone who is good intention like that, someone who puts self-service ahead, that person's not going to succeed in politics. And so, and that person won't be able to then protect my interest, because that person's not going to be able to succeed in politics. And that, I think, is a belief that many people have, and it's sad, and you see it being played out. And so I would love to see a shift in that, where when we do hold leaders accountable, and people get tired of the self-interest and double play, and I know, and still engage in the process. Because I think in one of your podcast episodes, it was talking about asserting our democratic rights and self-governments, and part of that is voting, and that's a very important thing for us to do. And yet some people get so disillusioned by the process that they was like, why bother?
Yeah, and when you do that, you're really giving up. You're giving up that important right. You are kind of energetically, saying, my ability to contribute to this privilege that's been given to me isn't worth what it purports to be, and you're belittling the whole structure, right? So it might be, I had a long argument once with an economics tutor around this, actually, around whether it was rational to vote or not. And my position was it was totally rational to vote. And his position was that it wasn't, because why would you even expend the effort to go to the polling booth if you know that your one vote is very unlikely to make the difference? And my position was that, even if you were going to take an economic viewpoint of total, the economic viewpoint is that we're all rational individuals. You understand that one vote is really important, because if everybody took the same position, then what's democracy worth? And we had a long argument, and I just wouldn't back down. Of course, neither would he. It's exactly that argument. Is it rational to vote? It's absolutely rational to vote. It's fundamental, it's important, it's critical. Is it rational to write to your member of parliament? Like, who says your member of parliament is going to listen to you? But if we all took the viewpoint that it wasn't worth doing these things, then we would all be living in a democracy that's only a democracy in name. So it is actually about that act of assertion. The economic way of thinking might say isn't rational, but individually we know it is, because you can't even quantify the impact on your behavior day to day, and how you carry yourself, on how the confidence you might have in all areas of your life, psychologically speaking. So those things are utterly important.
They are. And I had a political science professor at Ohio State University, where I went to school, once said that the bad thing about politicians is they cater to their voters. They care what their voters say, and they cater to their voters. The good thing about politicians is that they cater to the voters. They listen to the voters. So if you're the ones that stops talking and letting your representative know what you want them to do, they'll listen to the other people who do. So hopefully that still is in there somewhere. The other thing that you had mentioned is how you said when you talk about self-rights and asserting your right does not mean at the expense of others. It means in a way that you assert your rights, but with the understanding of elevating humanity as a whole. And that balance, when you look around the world today, and the United States is so divisive now between different parties, where you just see, from my perspective, I see a lot of people asserting their rights. I have the right to do this, I have the right to do that, without that second part of where does this fit in with everyone else? Where is it in to serve others? And how do we, I'm going to pull in some words from one of your podcast episodes, and I forget which one it was, but talking about in this time, instead of letting things divide us, come to it with a love energy as opposed to a fear and a hate.
Yeah.
And I just see like fear and hate seems to be the driving feeling in people. How do we shift it at a collective level, or how do we shift it into that love energy?
Yeah, it's an evolution, right? And we're all still evolving. But this is why it's so important from my perspective to do inner work, because this whole path of becoming aware that you can make a change, that just one person can make a change, it brings with it this real responsibility to examine ourselves, because if we're going to stand up on soapboxes, or we're going to put out a podcast, or we're going to stand up for what we believe in, we've got to have at the same time worked on all of the issues that we might have in ourselves, right? And what I'm talking about is those issues that cause separation. And those issues that cause separation generally come from some sort of trauma or hurt or wounding that we're carrying, because it stops us from really seeing others around us as part of us or the same as us. For example, I might start out with a noble idea that I want to change a particular law, let's say. And I'm firm about it, but I'm also compassionate about it. And yet, when I start to get into the nuts and bolts of trying to change the law and talk to other stakeholders, I get triggered easily, right? And that's because I might be carrying some kind of lack of confidence about whether I can really pull this off. And so if someone's hitting me at that particular trigger, then I may stop seeing them as someone that I want to work with and someone who can help me reach my goal, and start seeing them as a nemesis. So that's a simple example, right? I'm carrying this wound, and when it gets hit, I lose sight of my goal, and I start to create enemies or divisiveness. If I worked harder on myself, not harder, but if I'd done more work on myself, identified issues, I would be able to see more clearly. I'd be able to react with more compassion, more patience, have more of that self-reflection, that space between when somebody says something and I react. And I'd be able to bridge those differences more effectively. That's the sort of work that I think we really need to do when we're trying to make impact on the world. And a lot of people who are really very well-meaning and good-hearted are very focused on the external. I have to make this change in the world. And I'm going to start a not-for-profit, or I'm going to start a fund or a foundation, and I'm going to do all of this X, Y, Z. without actually doing a lot of work on themselves. You start with yourself, you are going to magnify the impact that you have. You may not even have a ton of expectation about what you're going to do, but the mere fact that you actually have worked on yourself is going to create that impact. You can't, it's the golden rule also. It's actually living and integrating that golden rule, that you would treat every other person the way you want to be treated yourself.
Yeah. With myself, I've been doing some inner work. There's still a lot more to go because when you talk about that space, right now I refer to myself, I have a delayed mindfulness. Like you can see the space and I'm triggered and I still kind of react. And then like a few minutes later, I'll be like, oh, okay, that's why I reacted that way. But I'm hoping that that space gets, the more work that I do and practice with it too, that it gets closer and closer to be there before the triggered reaction so I could pause.
It's helpful to do that kind of reflection. My thing was judgmentalness or, judgment. I being a trained lawyer, so you know what I'm talking about. There's that sense of having to be right.
Yes.
And always trying to poke holes in other people's arguments. And so that causes separation, that causes divisiveness. So I've had to really train myself to, look for the unity, to look for the common ground, and to accept that we can both be right, actually, or I might be wrong. Just that little things. And we are talking about that practice. It's really important.
Yeah. It is when you mention that, because so many people have told me that when we start talking about like substantive stuff or issues, they'll be like, Carrie, you're not having a conversation with me. You're trying to poke holes into what I'm saying. And it's like, it doesn't even matter what you believe. It's just like you're poking holes in it. And it's not a fun conversation. And I can appreciate that. But there's also my way of learning and understanding something is to ask questions, to poke holes in it. And I have to relearn, and it doesn't matter from which position. I like to poke holes in whatever side. But I shouldn't say but, and to be compassionate. That's the way that I learn, but also to understand the effect that that has on the other person. And is there a way to change the way that I either ask the questions or engage in it so it's something that we can both learn from and one person doesn't end up feeling like they're being lawyered, because that's not fun for anyone. And it does. It usually ends the conversation quicker without a full understanding. And I think many lawyers may have that.
We are taking a brief break from this conversation to ask for your financial support. With each episode, we hope you can see how lawyers and peacemakers like you are contributing to the healing of the world. It takes many kinds of resources for the integrative law movement to keep going and affecting change. Your monetary donation can help us continue this important work by supporting the activities and members of this community. Each contribution goes to promote the stability and accessibility of the movement and to support basic expenses like our Mighty Network group, web hosting, social media and event management, and this Integrative Lawyers of the World podcast. Because we like to give people choices, we have ongoing monthly options on patreon.com where you can choose a level of participation to match your budget. You can also make a one-time donation through PayPal. Thanks to our non-profit corporate sponsors, the Renaissance Lawyer Society, US supporters are able to make tax-deductible donations. Other countries, check your local tax laws. To help establish confidence in your choices to support us, we have set up an open, collective, transparent plan to track how the community money is spent. For ways to support the integrative law movement and our world-changing work, go to the Integrative Law website at integrativelaw.com and click on Support the Movement tab. Search for Integrative Law on Patreon or use the phrase Integrative Law Financial Support for the Movement in your favorite search engine. Thank you for your support and spending time with us today. Enjoy the rest of this conversation.
There's so many safe spaces we can create in our conversations. And it takes some courage. It takes humility. The idea that the other person might take advantage of your humility. So if I'm the one who's trying to create a safe space, then I might be the one who, does something that's pacifying. So I might make a concession. I might say, well, yes, I can see what you mean, or yes, you're right there, or I may have been wrong when I said such and such. And yet I'm taking a risk that person's going to reciprocate with another compromising gesture. And if they don't, then they don't. It's okay. I should be giving up that without the expectation. It's kind of my gift to the conversation, right? But when you start making those concessions because you're like, the other person has to make a concession. Oh, damn, they didn't. So now I'm going to have a problem with that. But when you make concessions, when you start to build that safe space, you just do it because you want to find common ground. You want to create a safe space. And then more conversations I have like that, the more I find that people come join me. And it actually isn't that hard to find the common ground. So talking about the divisiveness that we have now, I've said to people that I don't really, because I've stopped thinking in terms of left and right of politics. I just don't think that's a useful categorization of anything, really, of how people think. What's left and what's right? What you're fundamentally seeing when you start to talk to people who are quite passionate about changing things is that they all want the same thing. We want our families, our homes to be safe and happy. We want our kids to be happy, whether we have kids or not. We want children to grow up in a way where they can really express themselves. We want the world to be more environmentally safe, and so on and so forth, right? And if you look at the left, so-called left, and the right of politics, they want the same thing. Whether you're supposedly a fundamentalist religious person, or you're supposedly a socialist ideologue, you actually want the same thing. You want a better world, right? So how can you not find common ground?
I know. There's this an organization in the U.S. called NoLabels.org, where they said we look at the issues without the labels. And I appreciate going to their website whenever I want to understand something, because I want to understand it without the labels and seeing that common ground.
Yeah, and then it
with
comes back to
people.
just us being people, and we start to think, well, who actually gave us these labels?
It kind of goes back to what you were saying again, asserting our self-rights, asserting, what we want to protect, our values and our happiness and pursuit of life, and how to do that where we can elevate others too. It's that and part. And I love that you are talking about it on your podcast. You're talking about it here, because I'd like to hear that. I love hearing that and how it affects others. I think that's an important part. And how you worded it as, how can we be of service to others? How can we be of service to our planet?
It's that shift. It's that shift of mindset and once a person does it, I believe, once a person has that shift, it doesn't leave them. That shift of mindset from serving others, from serving yourself to serving others. The shift, you can make it intellectually first and then integrate it. Some people actually seem to have integrated or embodied it first, and then they might intellectualize it. It doesn't really matter. But the people I see on the path of wanting to improve things around them, I would say by and large have made this shift inside of them, where they've gone, it actually is more important to me to be of service to the world than to improve things for myself. So when your balance is towards serving others rather than serving yourself, that's when I believe you've made the shift. And you hold yourself accountable to that, and you hold others accountable if they purport to be of that same mindset. And then you find, like we're talking about government officials and so on, public servants who aren't.
You work with governance. You're on the board of a university, and work with nonprofits. And how you do all of this, I want to go back to your, I don't know, is it your vision statement or your mission statement of using the law to build purposeful, human-centered, earth-friendly, legal enterprises and ecosystems for happier humans and a better planet.
Yeah.
Just the clarity in that statement. I guess I just want to ask you questions about, explain the what and the how with that.
It basically comes from work that I did around values and purpose. So I actually worked with Kim Wright on my values, and I did an exercise with her where I established the things that were important to me, and they actually happened quite quickly. You know, like I actually was able to pull them out. I thought, oh, this makes sense. And there were things like having courage, integrity, you know, those were very important to me. Self-agency was important, you know, independence and self-agency.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, it's not to me a contradiction that I think the self is important, but I also think service to others is important. I think a person who looks after themselves is better placed to serve others. You know, a person who's fulfilled in themselves is then ready to make the impact on the world.
Yeah. I don't think there's an inconsistency in it. I can see how some people may, but to me, it's a realization of what we really are. We are our individual beings, but we're also part of a collective humanity on a shared planet.
You want to extend that same privilege to other people. You want them also to have that self-agency. And then the one of my other values I found was peaceful order. And that was something that was actually quite an eye-opener for me, right? That it actually finally made sense as to why do I enjoy being a lawyer? Because I thought about leaving the law. In the past, I had done it for about a year and a half, stepped out of law. And then I came back in because I thought I actually like this idea of being the advisor and the helper. I don't really need to be the person who's you know, making the decisions and getting all the limelight. I actually quite like helping someone else to do that. So it's a personality thing as well. And I like the fact that I can help create order out of something that might look chaotic. It also happens to be a skill that I enjoy. So those were my values. And then I began to look at, I had this deep urge to change things and help change things, because I actually do think that we've gotten ourselves into a terrible place. And I had this feeling of, you know, like, why have I chosen the things that I've chosen? Why did I choose to go to law school? Why did I choose to go into corporate law? You know, I didn't come out of law school and go into legal aid. I came out of law school, I went to a corporate law firm. And, you know, I learned about securities law and corporate transactions. You know, I worked with large organizations and so on and so forth. Why? So how can that skill set actually help me make a positive change? And then I thought, well, it's not just enough to look at the skill set that I have and then try and mold that skill set into something. I've actually really got to really love doing it. Otherwise, I'm just going to be in the same place because I was feeling not quite satisfied with my corporate law job. I'm just going to be in the same place, you know, where I'm not jumping out of bed and wanting to come to work and wanting to make this impact. I'm just going to be trying to fit these skills into a purpose. It's got to be passion driven. And so I actually just looked at all of the things that I loved reading and loved. I sometimes say to people, I'm the kind of person who will read the entire internet before I go to bed.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, oh, I just got to open up that website. Oh, no, there's a link that looks really interesting. So I started thinking about what things I loved reading on the internet, what books I loved reading. And I made a list of all these things. And I looked at them and went, wow, there's actually a thread there. And the thread was coming up with new structures, coming up with alternative structures. So I was reading books on alternative monetary systems, alternatives to financial systems, alternatives to businesses, even alternatives to other institutions like families and relationships and marriages, just questioning society's edicts around things. I thought, well, hang on, and I'm working in corporate law. Are corporations really the best way to go about organizing business? And so I started on that thread. And then I found out it was really funny because I thought, wow, am I the first person to think about this? Like in 2015 or 2017. Yeah, of course I wasn't the first person to think about it. But then I started finding all of these people who had. Yeah. I found out about the B corporations, and I read Conscious Capitalism and so on and so forth. And I started writing to these people and saying, wow, I read your book. It was really interesting. Or can we talk? And so then I met Kim and she introduced me to more people. And I realized that I was really interested in building a different kind of enterprise.
To me, when you say that and when I read that on your website, I felt extremely hopeful because the role of corporations and business in the world, in the economy, in how we're acting with regard to the climate is huge. The business in the corporate world has a huge driving impact on the rest of the world and how we live. So to see someone who wants to go with your background and now with your shift in focus to be able to advise corporations, look, maybe there's an alternative way. You still want to make money because you're a corporation, you want to make money, but maybe there's a way to do it differently that can be human-centered, that can be focused on how it affects the earth. Do you see yourself, do clients and corporations come to you asking ways, look, we want to incorporate these better practices, we just don't know how to do it within our existing structure?
What tends to happen is, what has happened actually, is that I reached out to people I knew who were doing this work. So I've mentioned the B corporations. There's also impact investing is aligned to this way of thinking. So it's using capital to create positive impact. So it's the traditional methods of financing, equity financing or debt financing, but making sure that the objective is to create impact.
But creating a market where the rancher or the business who is going to tear down the rainforest for agricultural purposes, let's find a way that person makes more money to protect it and conserve it. Is there like financial options where people are doing that?
Yes, totally. Yeah. So there are funds that are established with impact as their objective. Obviously, they also want to make returns to their investors, but their investors are interested not just in the financial returns, but in making sure that there's a positive impact. So that particular kind of fund would look for projects that are supportive of saving the rainforest or saving the oceans. And they often will have different specializations. So they'll have specializations that would be involved in poverty issues, There'll be a fund that might be dedicated to that. And then there may be a fund that's dedicated to ocean restoration, and so on and so forth. It's highly, highly developed and mature alternative financial industry that's grown up around it. So it's advisors, legal, financial, accounting, and so on, as well as the investors themselves and people to manage those funds. And so I got into that world. And by getting into that world, I then just created networks, right? And so now I tend to work for clients who are trying to make a difference in some way. So actually, I was looking at the clients I have right now, and it is without fail, it's one way or another. They're creating products or services that have positive impact. So from small ones to large ones. So, I'm working with a client now who's a very large organization, and they're trying to address ESG factors throughout their financing organization, throughout how they finance others, making sure that they put those measures into how they finance others. I've got a client that was a small client who's a social enterprise, and they're just embarking on their journey, seeking the right kind of partners and the right kind of financing, and so on and so on. So it's just because I have a reputation now, I suppose, and through networks, that people will say, you work with this kind of client, would you be interested in giving them advice? And word of mouth and networks is how it happens.
When you went through your client list and you saw that connection, that common thread that they're all trying to make a positive impact in their own way, how did you feel?
Well, it actually has come out. It's happened quite naturally because I run my own practice now. It's actually just ticked over 12 months. So first anniversary 3 days ago.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I kind of wasn't very surprised because I've created this for myself by running my own practice. But it was very gratifying. It was, because if I was working in a law firm, I wouldn't have that freedom to say, well, I now don't want to work for this particular client. If you're in partnership with many other lawyers, you don't get that luxury.
Did you take a moment for yourself, like at this 1 year mark, to sit back and just really, because you talked about it intellectually right now, but I want you to feel that, because you are creating something that is aligned with your values. You have a client list who are making a positive impact, and you're helping them expand that positive impact. And so I'm just excited for you as you're telling me about it.
Thank you. All I can say is it feels so completely natural that it didn't even feel like this sounds like I'm taking it for granted, but it didn't even feel like I needed to take that moment. It was almost like this actually doesn't sound very humble. It sounds a bit arrogant, but at the risk of sounding arrogant, it was almost like, of course. It's like, it must be that way because I've aligned myself. The hard work was in aligning myself, aligning my work with my passion, with my values, with my purpose. And because it was aligned, it could be no other way.
Being aligned in no other way, that goes into integrative law. Can you describe to me, what does integrative law or being an integrative lawyer mean to you?
We've actually touched on it. It's those people who have made the shift to serving others, the shift to using our lives, to devoting our lives to that way of being. Yeah. And that's the common thread that I see in people who call themselves integrative lawyers. I'm done serving myself. I'm done patting my own nest. I'm done trying to climb up the ladder for my own gain. It's just so, it's just not interesting. Do you know? It's not even not interesting. It's actually really exhausting.
When you're trying to do something else for other people that may not be aligned with your values, that's the
Yeah,
exhausting
even if
part.
even it means you get the massive salary and the title and et cetera, et cetera. But that part about it being boring too, right? I mean, because it just doesn't feel that deep part of you. So yeah, integrative law to me is about having made that shift to serve others. And you can say, oh, there's all sorts of other ways you can describe it, but to me, that fundamentally is it.
And then part of your shift was you have your law firm, which the name of your law firm is Geraldine Grace. Why did you choose that name?
It is my given name. So Grace is
Oh,
my middle name.
is it? I
Yeah.
love it. I thought
Yeah.
I was looking at it and I was like, oh, because your podcast says the host, Geraldine Johns-Putra, and I thought you gave the name as a way to, I'm giving grace to the practice. And it's just, I'm going to go back to it with the name of your firm and with your thing. Of course, it's your given name and it's part of your practice. That's nice.
Well, it was one of those wonderful things. I was thinking, Geraldine Johns-Putra is such a mouthful. It's one of those things where whenever I'm introducing myself in a room, I'm just like, can't I have a simple name? I love my parents, but I wish that they'd given me a much shorter first name, because the surname in itself is like 3 syllables long. And all of those sorts of things that I was thinking about when I was trying to come up with a name for my firm. And then I thought, well, I like Geraldine, actually. It's a strong name. What's the softener? And then it was staring me in the face. I'm like, oh my God, it's my middle name. And I told my mum this. And then she told me that Grace was actually, she's named all of her daughters Grace. All of my sisters and I have 3 sisters of 4 of us, we all have the same middle name.
Oh, that's
because
beautiful.
my mum loved the word so much.
Yeah.
And she reminded me that really grace is the ultimate love. That is the divine love is grace.
Yeah. How nice.
Yeah. So it was one of those serendipitous things.
And you have your own podcast, New Earth Podcast. Do you want to just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, the New Earth Lawyer Podcast is about showcasing lawyers who are changing the practice of law to change the world. It comes back to what we were talking about. It's just those lawyers who've really thought about, hang on a minute, is this really good for the planet? Is this really good for people to be practicing law in this particular way? And I've just finished, I've finished 49 episodes. I'm trying to get on to episode 50, which will close out the first season. Because this year I've done 6 months of these. It'll be 50 episodes all in, 25 interviews, 25 on my own. And I found 25 amazing lawyers. That's just expanded my network of friends and people I could go to, people I can refer my clients to in different jurisdictions and in different areas of law. It's been so amazing. And it's been so gratifying to see what people are doing. That just people are doing amazing things. And I actually have gone on to other podcasts and explained what lawyers are doing. And the response I've had from the community has been amazing. People are saying, really? I had no idea that there were lawyers who were prepared to, really be so innovative and start thinking about how they can do things better for the community, blah, blah, blah. It's nice. Been, a real gift.
I'm the same way with the different interviews with this podcast. I just walk away with people are amazing. And there's usually something, the serendipity of the interviews, there might be something that I'm struggling with or thinking about or dealing with, and something that the person says in the interview that just came up helps resolve or helps me feel better. Something that you said in this interview today too about not having judgment and just being of self-service and being aligned with our why. That just helped reset me. The last few days I've been kind of in that grinding phase of just trying to get things out, and I lost track of just enjoy and be realigned with your values. Okay, I see that we are out of time. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being part of Integrative Lawyers of the World.
Thank you, Kerry. It's been an absolute privilege.